This is Bruno with the LARVOL Group. We are a SaaS company serving the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry, selling solutions, data for medical affairs, for R&D, for competitive intelligence in pharma. And you're listening to LARVOL Friends, where we invite every week someone that is a friend of LARVOL. And we discuss various topics. Today, our guest is Tom Caravela from the Caroline Group, who is actually having a podcast as well called MSL Talk, which is the #1 podcast in the field medical in the MSL world. He has 200,000 listeners over 60 countries, and is running a company called the Caroline Group, an executive search firm, an advisory firm in the MSL world. So we're going to learn a lot about the MSL function and also about Tom's career and journey. So welcome to the podcast, Tom.
Thanks, Bruno. I appreciate you having me. I'm really excited to be here. And yes, you got it right. I am a friend of LARVOL and I'm a friend of yours. So I appreciate you having me on.
Terrific. The way we structure these is usually having first, you describe your journey, your professional journey, and how you build your own company in the MSL world. Also, maybe a little bit about your podcast as well. And so let's look at doing that for about 10 minutes. And then talking about, for people who do not know too much about MSLs, about what an MSL is, explaining the role, the value, also the emergence in our industry of that function. When I started in pharma, I did not know. I don't think the function really existed at the time. So our audience will be very interested in having you explain to them in a very simple term the why of that function and so on. And at the end, as we always do, we'll ask you to give a giveaway to share a thought, a phrase that the audience could keep from today's meeting. So let's start maybe with your professional journey. Who are you, Tom?
Sure. And I'll try to keep this somewhat brief just to keep the conversation flowing. I don't want to bore everybody with my story, but so my name's Tom Caravela. I am from New Jersey and I started my career. I spent 10 years in the field on the commercial side. So I started out as a primary care rep, and then I got more specialized, got into managed care. And then I was a field trainer for 7 years. So I have a background training field representatives across the Northeast, and accidentally on purpose wound up in the recruiting business. So it stemmed from a conversation that I had at the gym. I was working out and I recognized the guy next to me on the machine working out was one of my mother's neighbors. And we started up a conversation. And long story short, he was a part of a recruiting company and they were looking for somebody to consult for them. So I got involved in his company and I did that for about a year and then decided to go out and start my own firm based on the pharmaceutical marketplace. And we started recruiting MSLs really early on. So one of our clients came to us and said, "Hey, do you recruit for medical science liaisons?" I'll be honest with you, that was 20 years ago. I didn't even know what it was. I mean, it was a relatively new title. When I was a rep, we had different terms for what we were calling MSLs. And it was, the field started in 1967. So the first MSL was basically hired by Upjohn in 1967, but the role didn't really come into existence formally and collectively until probably the late 90s. So in 2002, when we first started recruiting MSLs, it was still a relatively new thing. And we started building out teams, helping our clients build out teams of MSLs therapeutically. And we never look back. So we've been specializing in building out medical science liaison teams for our pharmaceutical and biotech clients for 20 years. It's been a tremendous journey. We've seen the evolution of the MSL, which is much different today than what it was when we first started recruiting. I look forward to sharing that with you. But I can tell you there's never been a better time to be in field medical, to be an MSL, or to be involved in, whether you're a leader or someone in internal medical affairs supporting the MSL role. There's never been a better time. And I'm excited, and I consider myself really privileged to be a part of this community.
Thank you for that outline, Tom. It reminded me that I started my career in pharma working for Sandoz in Paris. And I remember learning about the pharmaceutical industry and being amazed by a few things. Number one, the more expensive the drug is, the more it sells. In France, people are not paying for their own drugs, so they want the most expensive drug because they see that as a proxy that the drug works. Number two, the more side effects the drug has, the more people think that it works.
Interesting.
And the third thing that surprised me is that you had the sales rep, and you had two types of sales rep at the time. Well, that was even way earlier than the time frame you had. And you had people who go to hospitals, and I think they were meeting with mostly, essentially KOLs. So that was the beginning, maybe, of what became the MSL function later on. And then detail rep that saw primary care, also specialists maybe, but not in hospital. And I do remember that distinction very clearly when I worked for Sandoz at the time. So now, a while later, I see how this became, as you said, its own function. And as I became more aware of field medical, of the MSL function, the medical science liaison, I couldn't help but by thinking about the regulatory background of this. So I want to talk about that for a second. So let me be maybe provocative, borderline, pushing the envelope. Sales rep can talk about, of course, the approved indication of a drug, what's on the label, on-label promotion. They can say, doctor, you should prescribe this drug because as approved by the FDA, it, grows hair or something, right? It has an approved indication. But legally, obviously, the rep cannot talk about the fact that it also, let's say, makes you smarter, right? Even if there's a study that shows that in addition to growing your hair, this drug makes you smarter. But there's a lot of studies, maybe they're trying to get that indication approved. So here comes the MSL function that cannot promote the fact that that drug makes you smarter, but can, I guess, answer questions, engage into a scientific conversation, and non-proactively, I guess, engage into a scientific and clinical discussion about the fact that turns out that aspirin not only grows your hair back, but it turns out it also makes you smarter, perhaps, possibly. There's some data that. Is that a fair description of what an MSL does from a non-MSL person who's never been an MSL?
Yeah, and I could tell you that that's definitely a part of it. I've become a student, I think, through my podcast and through my experience recruiting MSLs for so many different companies and having an understanding of what all the different companies are looking for and the inner workings of what makes a good MSL and a successful MSL. I've become a real student. So I think I'm qualified to answer that question. And I think that what you described is a big part of it. I think there's a lot more to it. I think that the MSLs, especially now, are evolving into a much bigger role for pharmaceutical and biotech companies, in that not only are they able to speak off label, as you just presented and mentioned, but they're also conduits. So MSLs are not only providing data, research, information, answering questions, presenting scientific data to key opinion leaders and healthcare providers, but they're also taking insights back to the pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies in order for the organizations to learn what the needs are in the patient community. So it's about improving patient outcomes through gathering insights from the top thought leaders so that it can help the organization to improve upon their strategies, their development, and their efforts to bring forth new therapies for the patient population that pharmaceutical company is specializing in. And there's more. There's a lot more to it than that. But that's the crux of it. I think that's kind of the foundation of the MSL role as it exists today.
How big is the MSL industry? Do we know how many MSLs is there out there?
You know, I asked that question a lot. You know, I attend all of as you know, because I see you at all of them. I attend all the conferences and congresses. I go to the MSL Society meeting and MAPS and, you know, Mass West, Mass East, all of the congresses. And I ask these organizations, the problem in medical affairs is there's no one standard. There's no governing body. There's no one entity that has all the information. So I can't give you a real answer to that. I would say that there's got to be probably 20,000. I would think 20,000 MSLs in the U.S. I could be way off on that number, but I would imagine that it's somewhere around 15 or 20,000, and I think that would probably also combine leadership. So when I say MSLs, I'm talking about MSLs and MSL leaders, and the folks that might be in medical excellence. So I would say that, you know, maybe there's 15,000 just straight medical science liaisons. Maybe there's another 5,000 in leadership and excellence. And then there's obviously several thousand in support roles. I could be totally wrong about that. I don't think it's a lot less. I don't think it's 5. Maybe it's 10 or 12, but I would say that it's in the thousands. I wouldn't say it's in the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. I think it's still a pretty small community, but I could be totally wrong about that.
Two questions. What is medical excellence? And second, what are the requirements to become an MSL? Yep.
Sure. Yeah. So medical excellence, to answer that question, is a function that's evolved probably recently, probably within the last 5 to 7 years. And it really is a title and a function that exists mostly in mid to large-sized pharma companies. And the role is specifically designed to support, enhance, improve the role of the field-based MSL. So the excellence folks are involved in bringing the MSL team to a higher level. It involves training. It involves the strategy of what it takes for the MSLs to be successful. So there's a strategic element to it, but then there's a lot of tactical parts of it too, where the folks on the excellence side will help field medical navigate a path to success. And that could be in best practices. It could be in tools. It could be in vendors and who's supporting their field medical efforts. Like as far as, you know, what CRM system are they using? What metrics are they following? So it's a function that's there to support and enhance the field medical position, and then obviously the organization, the medical affairs organization as a whole. As far as what are the requirements for medical science liaisons, it will vary from company to company, but for the most part, there are certain criteria that exist that I think that is pretty much standard across the industry. And in order, I would say that companies look for advanced degrees, so PharmD, MD, PhD, maybe a NP or a PA, nurse practitioners, or physician assistants. Someone with an advanced scientific degree, first and foremost, I think is at the foundation of the requirements for the position. They definitely are going to require people that have strong communication skills, both written and verbal. The ability to present, disseminate scientific information is really important. A lot of times our clients are looking for specific therapeutic areas of expertise. So we might be asked if, let's just say, for argument's sake, we're working with a company that's in the neuroscience space. Specifically, let's just say they have a drug for MS. Well, they may require that person to not only have an MD, PharmD, PhD, advanced scientific degree, but also either a background in neuroscience, in MS, maybe movement disorders, something that would be parallel and relevant to the scientific area that that company specializes in. And then there's a lot of travel involved in the MSL role. I know with COVID, obviously people weren't traveling as much, if at all. Now people are getting back out there. So there's a travel requirement. When you're an MSL, you need to be willing to travel a certain percentage of the time. It could be anywhere from 40% to 80% travel, across the US and or within a specific geography. But that's a key requirement that is mandatory. The other thing too is a lot of our clients specifically ask that the candidate has prior MSL experience, which makes it difficult for somebody new, someone who's an aspiring MSL, to break into the role. We would say probably upwards of 70, maybe 80% of the positions out there require prior MSL experience. Again, those are just some of the criteria. It does vary, but that's usually at the foundation of what an MSL job description might look like.
Post-COVID, do you see a change? Are people traveling? Is there going to be even MSLs who do not travel and only do remote MSL work? And are the key opinion leaders, the people visited by the MSLs, are they, some of them saying, I don't want to see people in person, let's just Zoom?
Yeah. So there's been a big paradigm shift since COVID. For a better part of a year, maybe more, probably more, the role changed. And it changed to an all virtual role for a time. And what's happened is it's really kind of proven to an extent, I'm going to say that, to an extent, it's proven that there's still a lot of work that can be done. There's value that can be offered from MSLs and by MSLs to the KOL community. So you are able to be successful in, let's just say, communicating and transacting information via virtual mediums. So what's happened is, yes, there are a lot of KOLs that said, well, this is all I need. I don't need to see anybody. I have a busy practice. And yeah, from now on, I'm just going to kind of demand that my MSLs will just meet with me over Zoom. That's a thing. I wouldn't say it's an overwhelmingly the majority of what KOLs think, but there are KOLs out there that do feel that. The second thing is, I think the pharmaceutical industry, companies like, biotechs and pharma of all sizes, have come up with the idea that, well, if we can be successful in doing this, maybe we'll just have a virtual MSL or what they call an on-demand MSL. And so, but here's the thing about the virtual and the on-demand MSL. It's not a whole team of people. it's usually maybe a handful, one or two MSLs within a company, within a department. And those folks are hired or put into this virtual or on-demand role to fill in a certain need. So for example, in what we call white space areas. So let's just say you break out we're talking about the United States now just for a second, but this could be anywhere globally where maybe there's white space, maybe there's territories and there's states where there's not a ton of KOLs, so you don't need to have an MSL dedicated to that territory, but you do want to have some coverage. They might make those white space areas covered by the virtual or on-demand MSL. That now becomes their jurisdiction. So that MSL never needs to leave their house, but they are on call or on demand for KOLs and HCPs in those communities, in those areas, to help answer questions, do virtual presentations, or whatever it might be. So yeah, so we've seen those are two things, I will call them paradigm shifts, that have come about from the pandemic, is that video and the virtual interaction has led to some difference of opinion in the KOLs in how they prefer to interact. And then there's also this ability for the pharmaceutical industry to be able to employ a different breed of MSL to handle specific needs within the organization.
My mom just texted me and said, "What is a KOL and what is an HCP?"
Hi, Mom. So a KOL that's an acronym for key opinion leader, and HCP is an acronym for healthcare professional. So when you're in the pharmaceutical industry and you're trying to influence doctors and the community that exists of prescribers, people that are out there treating patients and prescribing medications to patients, or looking for therapies for patients, we often call them key opinion leaders or healthcare professionals, KMEs, key medical experts. So companies have different ways of referring to what we call the interdisciplinary of care that exists out in the medical community.
And my mom is taking notes. She got KME too now, so that's very good. So I'm going to try to get you in trouble a little bit in a friendly way. You said the phrase "trying to influence."
Yeah.
Right. Is that in compliance with what an MSL does?
So here's the thing, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because there are a lot of terms that are taboo in the medical affairs space. I personally, I'm a certified speaker, trainer, and coach. I go out and train MSL teams. I'm a keynote speaker, and one of my specialties is I speak on influence and I speak on persuasion. That shouldn't be perceived as something that only applies to the commercial or sales side. I'm not endorsing persuasion as a tactic, and I'm not endorsing influence necessarily as a tactic. But what happens is, as individuals, we're all trying to create stronger relationships, both internally and externally. And the way that we develop internal and external relationships is by utilizing certain principles. And a lot of those principles are about influence. How do we treat others? How do we approach people? What kind of value are we bringing? What kind of questions are we asking? Whose interests are in mind? Do we have the other person's interest in mind? Or are we just going in with our own agenda? in the medical affairs world, you hear the term emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence and influence go hand in hand. It's just that the term is not a buzzword in medical affairs because I think it's deemed commercial. It's a term that you might hear on the commercial side. But I'm a big advocate of how important it is to forge and work towards strong relationships, both internally and externally, in your professional career. And when it comes to that, I think that there's some strong principles that need to be applied each and every day so that we can do our part in that relationship. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Time is going fast. Quick question. In the US, what's a typical take-home pay for an MSL?
So in the US, and I'll tell you, I started before by saying that it's never been a better time to be an MSL. Well, one of the reasons is MSLs are very well paid. And right now, the range for MSLs in the US might be anywhere from, say, 160,000 base salary per year to maybe 210 or 215 for more senior MSLs, what are often called executive or principal MSLs. And there's always bonus potential. The bonus potential could be anywhere from 15 to 20%, sometimes slightly higher. And the role typically comes with some type of car benefit. So whether it's a company car or a car allowance, there's a package that exists. So it's base salary, bonus, car benefit, and then whatever long-term incentives might exist. So it's a very lucrative position.
Just got a message from our producer Shahir, who decided to resign his position to apply to become an MSL. We're in trouble. We're in trouble. I have a lot of questions. Perhaps we'll have another meeting one day, also about your podcast experience and how you built it over a short couple of years to have that important role in the industry. But we're getting toward the end, so I know you have maybe your takeaway ready. If not, you can formulate it and share with our audience, for my mom in particular, and for everybody else, if there is one thing to remember from our call today about the value of MSLs in pharma, what should people remember from our meeting today?
It's one word, and the word is in the title. It's value. People, I think, really need to focus on what value are you bringing to others. The MSL, the successful MSL, does this for a living. They do this every day as a practice. They find ways to bring value to their key opinion leaders, their KMEs, their HCPs, whatever it might be. But here's the thing, though. We can take this into any area of our profession and find success. What value, Bruno, do you bring to your customers, to your clients? What value am I bringing? One of the reasons that I think my podcast has been successful is because it's a value-based program. The intention of the podcast is to provide value for the listeners so that every single person that listens to the podcast is going to learn something. There's going to be a takeaway. There's value. And I think that that's a key, not just in our professional lives, but even in our personal lives. Maybe we all just need to take a step back and say, what's the value that I'm bringing into my marriage, to my spouse, to my children? What's the value that I'm bringing to my mom and dad? Bruno, I know you're a good son. I'm sure you are, because your mom's listening to you right now. Right?
Well, maybe,
so think about
but my son might question my value now from listening to you. So you say, well, Dad, are you bringing in a value to me right now? So this is a wonderful, you Tom, have created a lot of value today for us and our listener. And I want to thank you And I want to recommend to everybody listening to follow you on all social media, from Instagram to Twitter to Facebook to LinkedIn, to Pinterest and to TikTok. If you're not on any of these, I'm sure you will be soon, Tom. So thank
Oh,
you
yeah.
very, very much, sir. And I hope we'll meet again in another podcast.
I would love that. Thank you, Bruno. And thank you for all that you do. And I look forward to seeing you soon, my friend. And bye, Mom. Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Are we still on? Shahir?